We are going to look at Photoshop versus Illustrator and actually kind of begin our first small Photoshop project. So the biggest difference between Illustrator and Photoshop is how they function, how they work. In Illustrator, what happens is you have paths, you have lines that are made of math basically. Whether they're circles, rectangles, any kind of shape in between. Illustrator, everything is a path. And what those paths do is, because they're made by math, if we make something bigger or smaller, the math just gets reconfigured and that object will stay crystal clear. You can adjust points on that object with the direct selection tool. You're just constantly changing and moving these paths, and you're setting fill and stroke colors on these things. Photoshop, on the other hand, works a little bit differently. Photoshop is all about pixels, little dots. These colored dots from far away form a picture. The closer you zoom in on these things, then the more you can see these dots. So because of those fundamental changes, that kind of changes how we work with these programs and kind of what each is useful for. So Photoshop is used for what it sounds like it would be used for, photos. So let's start looking at this, and where we're actually going to begin is a small project like this, and it all starts actually in Google. So if we go to Google and we search for something, let's say Crosby lifting Stanley Cup. This is one I did earlier today. So what we would do is we'd go over to Google Images, and this is the thing you really have to focus on. The key here is to find large images for any project that you're doing. You have to start off with good images. If you're not using good images, you're not going to have a good project. You know, that's kind of as simple as it is in Photoshop. And in Illustrator, when we were done with an image, we would turn it off. So if there were portions you didn't like, or it was blurry or whatever, it didn't matter. Here it does. So first thing, when you get into Google Images, you always want to go to Tools and pick large for the image size. Now you can start searching around for one that you like. Well, let's say I like this one. All right. What I'm looking for this project is I need something in the foreground, like a person like this, and I need something kind of going on in the background. You wouldn't want to do this against like a brick wall. It's not going to be as interesting for this effect. So you could do sports. You can also do musicians. For this would work well as well, and anything else that you can think of that kind of fits that criteria, where you have a person or some kind of subject in the foreground. So I'm going to save this picture now. So again, this picture is different than this picture. What Google does is it creates a small version of the pictures. When you click on them, then you have access to that full-size version. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this picture. So a couple ways I can save this. Most of the time Google will let you just kind of drag this and drop it on your desktop. Now that one's saved because I see it here. If I didn't see it here, the other way that I can save this, if it wouldn't let me drag it, is I can right click and go to Save Image As. I could choose the desktop, I could give this a name if I want, and then hit Save, and it's going to save it on the desktop just like this. I would just have to find it on my desktop after I save it. So I'm going to cancel that because I already saved it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working in Photoshop. So in Photoshop, we're going to create a new document. We don't want to work off of this picture because this picture is just whatever random size it happened to be. And in fact, let's look at how big this picture is. To do that, and this is a good kind of skill to know because throughout the year you're going to need to know how big a picture is to know that you got something big enough to work with. So if you right click on a file, you go to Get Info. Under More Info, you might have to hit the little triangle to open it up. One of the things it'll tell you is the image dimensions. So here it is here. In this case, it's 3,500 by 2,000 roughly. It also tells you what kind of camera was used. There's all kinds of good information in here. Sometimes it'll tell you where the picture was taken. You know, there's a lot of information associated with a picture other than just the pixels. So that's kind of neat to see. But anyway, that's the big one, is you just want to know how big something is. A big enough picture, most times if the smaller number is like 800 to 1,000, you're in pretty good shape. Anything over 1,000, you're fine. So anyway, we have this picture now. Next, I said we want to make a new document in Google. I don't want to start working directly on here. So what I'm going to do, or I'm sorry, in Photoshop I want to make a new document. So I'm going to go to File, New. In this case, for this particular project, I know that this thing is just going to live on the web when we're done. It's not going to get printed out. So as far as these presets go, I'm going to go to Web. Things that we make to print are actually going to be bigger files because when you print something, you actually need more pixels. So in this case, we're going to go to Web Minimum. Now, based on the orientation of your picture, that will determine whether you click here or here. Now, my picture was wider rather than tall, so I'm going to pick this one. I'm going to go ahead and hit Create. Now, to get this picture onto this project, I'm going to go ahead and drag from my desktop and drop it right on here. This is kind of just previewing, showing what this image will look like in this space. I haven't actually put it here yet. When I press return or enter on my keyboard, now it's there. Alright, so that image kind of exists there. In Illustrator, we used to put images in this way, and then at the top there was a button to embed that image. Well, we have to do the same thing in Photoshop, we just have to do it in a different way. In your Layers window, you find that image that you just brought in, and you'll notice there's a little icon on top of the little preview of what that layer looks like. And this is telling us that this picture doesn't really live in our Photoshop project. It lives on the desktop. The problem with that is if I delete it off the desktop, the next time I go to open this project, this picture won't show up. So to fix that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click. Now, it's important where I right click. If I right click on this image, I get one menu. If I right click over here, I get a totally separate menu. This is the menu that I need. I want to rasterize this layer. It's the same as embedding it. Now those pixels actually live on this document. Now, the way Photoshop works, everything's layers. It's basically clear sheets of paper. That's an easy way to think of a layer. So where Photoshop's a little bit tough in the beginning, you're used to Illustrator where you can just click on anything, select it, move it, do whatever you want. Well, if you accidentally put the pixels from this picture on this layer, and then later we accidentally put another set of pixels on this same layer, when I move one picture, it's going to move the other picture at the same time. So you kind of have to get used to that. Alright, so anyway, for our sake right now, what I want to do is I want to make this picture kind of fill the screen, knowing I'm going to lose, in my case, some of the sides of the picture. The proportions of my paper, in general, aren't going to be the same as my picture. So what that means is my paper is one size, this is a different size. When I make this bigger, in my case, I'm going to lose some of the sides. You might lose some of the top and bottom of yours. But here's how you change the sizes. If you hit Command, hold down Command, press T, that will allow you then to grab the corners. You don't want to grab the ends because even if you're holding Shift, it's still going to stretch out your picture. So instead, grab from the corner, hold Shift, drag this thing out, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Now you're probably starting to notice another difference between Photoshop and Illustrator. You cannot work outside of your sheet of paper. That's all you have to work with. So I'm going to decide something like that is how I want to place this thing. And I'm not done yet. I've changed the size, but what Photoshop does is when you change the size of something, it needs to change every single pixel and make it bigger or smaller. Well, that's a lot of thinking for the computer to do, especially if I keep dragging and moving this thing and changing the sizes. So instead, it kind of shows you a preview of what the image will look like at that size. Then when you're done transforming it, you press return or enter, and it's going to finalize things, and you notice the image just became more clear. Now I'm able to use other tools and move on. If I did not press enter, it would almost feel like the program's broken. If I click the menus at the top, everything may have been grayed out. Like you see a few of these choices are grayed out. Everything may have looked like that because I hadn't finished transforming that. If I click on another tool, it probably would have asked me if I wanted to go ahead and apply that transformation, if I wanted to finish that thing. It needs to finish changing the size before you're able to do anything else. So anyway, now my image is on here. It's the size I want it to be. It's rasterized, we call it, so that those pixels actually live here. The next thing I want to do is start working with a selection. Now, we haven't talked about selections yet, so let's kind of get into what those are a little bit. We're going to make a really simple selection here. I'm going to do a rectangle marquee. We're going to end up deleting this later. This is to kind of show you what this does. When I make a selection where I have these, we call them marching ants, this marquee going around something, I selected this portion of my screen. I can't do anything out here. I'm locked out of that part. I made it so I can only work on this part of my screen, and you'll see where this is useful later. But for now, to just kind of show you, if I take my eraser, if I try erasing inside the box, I can. As soon as I try to erase outside the box, though, it's kind of like I'm cut off. I'm not allowed to work out there. So now to undo this, because obviously I don't want this, if I press Command Z, which we use all the time in Illustrator, it does undo one step. But when I undo again, it's like I'm undoing that step. So it's like I'm redoing on almost. So I can't just keep tapping Command Z to go back. Instead, Photoshop has the history window. This is sort of like a time machine. The further up this I click, the further back in time I go. Now, once I go back to a point in time, if I do a new thing, it kind of erases the future. It gets rid of all this other stuff that I did because that future no longer exists. I went back in time, I did something, I changed the future. So I'm back in time now. Again, I don't need to click and drag these things to the trash can or click over here. All you need to do is just click on the words. So I'm going to go back here to where I was finished free transforming this right before I made that rectangle marquee. And now I'm going to make our actual selection. We're going to use what's called the quick selection tool. Keyboard shortcut is W. With this tool, to the right of the letter P are two brackets right next to the P. One will make this circle bigger, one will make this circle smaller. And what I want to do is I want to start selecting. So I'm almost just painting over top. I'm holding my mouse down, I'm letting go every once in a while, and I'm just kind of painting over the surface, and I'm kind of looking at my selection as I go. Now the way that this tool works, it uses color contrast to try to find the edges of things. So for example, his black sleeve on a light background would be really easy to cut out. It had a little trouble here because this part of the background where my mouse is dark, and so is this black sleeve. So I'm just going to keep working here. I'm adding to my selection. I know I'm getting more selected than I want to. I can go back and fix that. To fix that, what I would do is I simply hold Option while I'm using this tool. So I'm going to hold Option, and if you notice, I'll try to do it here so you can see it. When I hold Option, the plus changes to a minus. So I'm going to hold Option, and I'm just going to kind of paint away this part that I want to go away. Now I also want to get rid of this part in here. And the reason I let go a lot with the mouse is I could hold down the entire time, but if I mess up, when I go to undo that thing that just got messed up, I'm going to be undoing more things. So the more often I let go of my mouse, the more kind of places there are in my history that I can go back to. So I'm going to clean this up some. And I'm going to need to make this smaller. So again, next to the P, I'm using these brackets, and I'm just erasing away the parts I don't want. So I'm going to make sure that I got all this. So I'm adding those parts to my selection. So there you go. So now the outline is kind of going around the part that I want. It may not be 100% perfect. We're going to be able to fix that in a little bit. So I'm just trying to get this kind of close. Alright, so I'm fairly happy with that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add what's called a mask to this. I'm going to hide kind of all this outer portion that's not selected. So to do that, in my layers, this button right here is going to create a mask. Once I do that, those pixels that we were looking at before that are now just kind of look like they're white, they're not gone, they're just hidden. To show you this, I could take this mask right here, I can right click and I can disable it. So there they are, they're hiding right there. So now I'm going to re-enable this mask. Now there's two things I can do. I can mess with the layer itself, and I can also mess with the mask. So I have to know which one I'm clicked on because it's going to do two very different things. So if I click on this mask part, I could use my paintbrush, and wherever I paint white, the picture is going to show up. Wherever I paint black, so by default my colors were set to white and black, I can hit this button here to switch foreground and background colors. So whichever one's in front, now I'm going to be painting black. If I paint black on something, that part is hidden. So again, on my mask, wherever it is black, I'm not seeing that part of the picture. Wherever it's white, I am seeing. So what I need to do is I need to go in and kind of fix up my mask. So I'm going to make sure I am looking at my picture here as I work, and I'm going to kind of zoom in now and clean up a chunk of this. Now you wouldn't want to make your whole selection this way. This is why we use that tool, because it's going to take me a really long time to kind of paint and clean up the whole thing. So I'm going to paint black out here to get rid of some of this part of the background that's stuck around. So I got it pretty close again with that selection tool. Now I'm just kind of refining this thing with this. So with the paintbrush, I could use my tablet to do this. I could use my mouse, kind of whatever I feel comfortable with. I'm again going to need to change the size of my brush a lot. So that can also happen up here for the size. But the thing that I can't do with the brackets next to the letter P is I can't change the hardness. The hardness is kind of how fuzzy something is. So this is a really soft brush where the edge of it's kind of like fuzzy. A harder brush would be like this one where it's either kind of painting or it's not along the edge. So sometimes I may want to turn down that hardness to kind of make something fade away a little bit. That can kind of make things look a little more natural as you do them. So basically I would just work my way around this, painting black on the parts I don't want to see, and then anything that's missing I would paint white. So say I lost part of his hat here. I'm not sure that I did, but let's find out. So I'm going to flip-flop this, so I'm painting white. And I'm going to just start painting back in some of that. And sure enough, yeah, I did lose some of his hat. So let's just kind of bring that back. And now you can kind of see I brought too much here. Again, I'm going to flip-flop that, so I'm painting, whoops, black. And I'm going to paint away the parts I don't want. So you can use this. Now when I get in here, I may need a smaller brush to kind of get into some of these tight little nooks and crannies. And zoom is your friend. Zoom in. I'm holding Option when I zoom. And as I zoom, you're also seeing that fundamental difference between Illustrator and Photoshop where I can see individual pixels. Another thing that's kind of neat, you notice his jersey is white, but the further I zoom in, you'll start seeing it's actually all different shades of grays and whites. When I look at it from far away, it looks like one color, but as you get close, you actually see all those individual little shades. So this will be the end of this first video. Again, if you're having any trouble, if you start turning your object, the actual layer, black and white, it's because you have this part selected instead of this part. So go ahead and get that part done.